Turki Alalshik is giving Dimitri Bivol this ultimatum. It's sort of the same kind of thing as he did with Tim Tszyu. There may be something that he didn't like about David Benavidez, but in talking to the possibility of the Benavidez and Bivol fight happening, all of a sudden Turki Alalshik has eliminated WBC, which was where Benavidez was the mandatory. Mind you, the hypocrisy of the WBC is another conversation altogether.
The boxing world is buzzing with rumors of a potential clash between Dimitri Bivol and David Benavidez. If this fight happens, it will be one of the most intriguing matchups in recent history. However, behind the scenes, there's a lot of drama involving boxing promoters, politics, and financial negotiations that could make or break this fight. Paulie Malignaggi has been vocal about his concerns, shedding light on the key players shaping this bout. Let's break down everything we know so far, including the controversies, power struggles, and what this means for the sport. Paulie Malignaggi has raised concerns about Turki Alalshik's growing influence in boxing, suggesting that what once seemed like a positive push for the sport is now taking a different turn. Initially, Alalshik was praised for bringing together some of boxing's biggest names and organizing high-profile fights. His involvement seemed to signal a new era for the sport, one where politics and promotional disputes wouldn't stand in the way of the best fights being made. However, Malignaggi now believes that Alalshik is becoming the very thing he once stood against. Instead of uniting the sport, his power in matchmaking and event organization appears to be consolidating control in a way that could limit opportunities for fighters and fans alike. The concern isn't just about one fight, it's about the long-term vision for boxing and whether Alalshik's involvement will help or hurt the sport in the years to come.
That's sort of one of my issues with Turki Alalshik is, he wants to make a league and he thinks he's going to make the best league in the world with Dana White and all this stuff. First of all, I think Dana just completely conned him, because Turki basically used Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren to bring in this Trojan horse.
Taking his concerns further, Malignaggi believes that Alalshik has been influenced or even manipulated by key figures in boxing promotions. He points to Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren, two of the sport's most influential promoters, as the ones who have brought a Trojan horse into boxing, implying that their collaboration with Alalshik may not be as beneficial as it seems. According to Malignaggi, Dana White is now using Alalshik's enthusiasm and resources to push his own agenda, turning what was supposed to be a game-changing force in boxing into just another business-driven operation. Dana White, best known for his role in the UFC, has a reputation for prioritizing financial control over fighters' interests, and Malignaggi fears that he is now implementing the same approach in boxing through his collaboration with Alalshik. If true, this could mean that major fights, including Bivol versus Benavidez, are being orchestrated not for competitive integrity but for financial and business gain.
Basically used Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren to bring in this Trojan horse into boxing, and then he just basically left them out to dry and got with Dana, who has no history in boxing, used Fertitta money to take over a sport that had no competition really at that time aside from Pride, and so it was a lot easier to take over that sport. And now he thinks he's going to do the same thing in boxing.
Malignaggi further argues that Dana White's lack of experience in boxing makes his involvement a risky proposition. While White has been hugely successful in running the UFC, boxing is an entirely different sport with a much deeper history, complex promotional structures, and different fighter expectations. Unlike MMA, where the UFC has total control over matchmaking and contracts, boxing operates with multiple governing bodies and independent promoters. Malignaggi highlights that White has never had a positive reputation among fighters in the UFC, with many speaking out about unfair contracts and low fighter pay. If White brings this same business model into boxing, it could lead to major disruptions in how fights are negotiated and how fighters are treated. Malignaggi suggests that for a sport as deeply rooted as boxing, White's entry could create unnecessary turmoil rather than innovation. This raises the question, if White's influence is growing, what does that mean for Bivol versus Benavidez?
And this is a guy who's, has never really had a fighter say many good things about him in Dana White. So I think he's going to have a hard time just in that regard alone, because boxing is, it's fragmented. Yeah, there's a lot to work on, but boxing is also a sport that has a big foundation, and so it's going to be hard to break that under the business model that Dana thinks he's going to break it under.
One of Malignaggi's most direct criticisms is that Alalshik may be aligning himself with the wrong figures in boxing. While his initial efforts were seen as a way to bring fresh energy into the sport, his increasing ties with Dana White and other business-driven individuals could be problematic. Malignaggi suggests that instead of focusing on improving boxing, Alalshik is investing in people who do not necessarily have the sport's best interests at heart. This could explain some of the recent controversies surrounding major fights, including negotiations for Bivol versus Benavidez.
And then Turki, I personally, in small words, I think Turkey got on the wrong horse, essentially. He's riding the wrong horse here.
One of the most intriguing points Malignaggi makes is the claim that Bivol is being given an ultimatum regarding this fight, similar to what happened with Tim Tszyu. In boxing, fighters often negotiate for better paydays, but Malignaggi suggests that Bivol may have asked for too much money, causing friction in the negotiations. If true, this would explain why discussions about the fight have become more complicated.
Turkey Alalshik is giving Dimitri Bivol this ultimatum. It's sort of the same kind of thing as he did with Tim Tszyu. There may be something that he didn't like about David Benavidez.
Another major controversy surrounding the potential Bivol versus Benavidez fight is the sudden removal of the WBC from the equation. Originally, Benavidez was made the mandatory challenger for the winner of this fight, which meant that the bout had official backing from one of boxing's major sanctioning bodies. However, reports suggest that Alalshik has now removed the WBC's involvement, potentially to gain more control over the matchmaking process.
David Benavidez, it may be something that, he didn't like about, the way David Benavidez may have asked for too much money, or I don't know. I really don't know.
Adding to the confusion, Malignaggi calls out the hypocrisy of the WBC when it comes to enforcing mandatory challengers. For years, Benavidez was the mandatory opponent for Canelo Alvarez, yet the WBC never enforced the fight. Now, with Bivol versus Benavidez potentially on the horizon, the WBC has once again stepped back, raising questions about their motivations.
Just, kind of taking a wild stab at this. Because, originally everything was on the table, right? Benavidez was going to be the mandatory for the winner of Beterbiev and Bivol, and he is.
The WBC's involvement in high-profile fights has been inconsistent for years, and Malignaggi's comments highlight a troubling pattern. Benavidez had been the WBC mandatory for Canelo Alvarez for a long time, yet the organization never enforced that fight. Now, with the possibility of Benavidez facing Bivol, the WBC seems to have been completely removed from the equation.
But in talking to the possibility of the Benavidez and Bivol fight happening, all of a sudden, Turkey Alalshik has eliminated WBC, which was where Benavidez was the mandatory. Mind you, the hypocrisy of the WBC is another conversation altogether.
One of the most controversial aspects of Malignaggi's statements is the idea that Alalshik might be moving toward creating his own championship belt. Traditionally, boxing has been governed by major sanctioning bodies like the WBC, WBA, IBF, and WBO. These organizations set rules, enforce mandatories, and provide structure to the sport.
He's another conversation altogether that they don't exactly get to escape that too. The guy was a mandatory for Canelo for years and nobody enforced it. All of a sudden, now they're going to enforce the Benavidez and Bivol mandatory. Why?
Despite all the controversy, one thing is certain: Bivol versus Benavidez would be an incredible fight. Malignaggi himself acknowledges that if the fight gets made, it will be a spectacle. The reason? Their contrasting styles. Bivol is a master technician, known for his disciplined footwork, precise counterpunching, and ability to control distance. He dismantled Canelo Alvarez using these skills, proving that he can neutralize aggressive fighters. On the other hand, Benavidez is a relentless pressure fighter with one of the highest punch outputs in boxing. His ability to cut off the ring and overwhelm opponents with volume makes him one of the most dangerous fighters in the sport. The question is, can Benavidez break through Bivol's defensive wall, or will Bivol's technique be too much for him to handle? This stylistic matchup is what makes this fight so compelling.
Probably because Turkey Alalshik threw him to the scrap heap and decided he wasn't going to use them anymore, and he's going to create his own belt. So now all of a sudden, you're gonna enforce the mandatory.
One of the more interesting angles to this fight is the potential power struggle happening behind the scenes. Malignaggi suggests that the fact that Matchroom Boxing and PBC are suddenly working together on this fight indicates that there may be resistance against Alalshik and Dana White's growing influence. Historically, Matchroom and PBC have been rival promoters, rarely collaborating on major fights. But now, with Bivol versus Benavidez gaining momentum,
I think it'll be a great fight. I think it's a great stylistic clash, and there'll be time to really analyze it if the fight does get made. Right now, it's just being talked about.
Bivol versus Benavidez is more than just a fight. It represents a major shift in how boxing operates. The involvement of Alalshik and Dana White, the uncertainty surrounding sanctioning bodies, and the financial disputes all point to a larger battle for control of the sport. If this fight happens smoothly, it could indicate that boxing is evolving in a new direction. However, if it falls apart due to political reasons, it will be another example of how the sport continues to be plagued by unnecessary roadblocks. Malignaggi's insights provide a crucial look into the inner workings of boxing's power structure, and whether fans like it or not, these issues will shape the future of the sport. For now, all we can do is wait and see how this situation unfolds.
The fact that Matchroom and PBC may align to make this fight all of a sudden shows that there is sort of this pushback against this Turkey Alalshik and Dana White TKO league.
What do you think about the potential fight between Dimitri Bivol and David Benavidez? Do you believe the power struggles behind the scenes will prevent this fight from happening? Or will boxing politics finally take a backseat to the action in the ring? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want more in-depth boxing analysis, make sure to subscribe to Boxi Hub and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. We cover all the latest fights, controversies, and insider news in the boxing world. Hit that like button if you're excited for Bivol versus Benavidez, and stay tuned for more exclusive content.